Hi, everyone. I'm going to give it one more minute for those that are still joining us, so just hang on in there. All right, let's get started. Hi, thank you for joining our fireside chat. We're going to be speaking with our friends at Progressive Insurance today about how they're making the invisible visible. And they're doing that through visualization of how their knowledge flows across their organization and between cross-functional teams. I'm Rebecca Dumashell. I will be your host today. Before we get started, I do want to cover off some housekeeping items. We are recording today for anybody who can't join us. I do want to encourage everybody to stay until the end because we do have Q&A. If you want to ask a question, just drop it in the Q&A box off to the side, and that'll be routed to our moderators, and we'll cover it at the end of the discussion. Without further delay, I'd like to kick off with some introductions. Again, my name is Rebecca Dumashell. I'm Director of Technical Product Marketing here at Stack Overflow. I'm joined by my colleague, David.
Hello, thanks for the intro. So my name is David. I'm currently the Senior Data Analyst on the marketing team. And through that team, I've become pretty much responsible for almost all things data, from our annual developer survey that runs every year and identifying our highest value customers. As a full-blown data nerd, I'm passionate about bridging the gap between business and data science, and also data storytelling.
Awesome. James?
Hey everyone, I'm James Morgan. I'm the co-lead of Progressive's open source office. The open source office oversees our open source and inner source strategies at Progressive, as well as our Stack Overflow initiative.
Awesome. And Michael, aka Dude.
Hey everybody, I'm Michael Parkins, but everybody calls me Dude. I co-lead our open source office with James.
Cool. All right, before we dive into the data visualization, can we talk a little bit about Progressive's adoption of Stack Overflow for Teams?
Yeah, so for adopting Stack Overflow, Progressive had like a couple high-level reasons. We have a few IT goals related to increasing our business agility. And then we also have a series of core values, one of them being excellence, and that focuses on improving performance. So from a high-level perspective, Stack Overflow is a good fit for Progressive. But if I dive a little deeper, Stack Overflow allows our developers to self-serve the problems that they're running into. They can ask their question, and they ask it to a large audience immediately. And then they have a relatively quick turnaround time on getting their answer. Or an even better scenario is that the question that they are asking might already be answered. And so there's zero downtime there. And it allows our developers to stay in the flow longer. And that's where we want to be. That's where we're most efficient. Overall, for adoption, we've had 1,100 questions already asked on Stack between our development community, and over 1,500 answers. On average, our questions have been viewed 60 times. So overall, it's a huge success in terms of adoption.
Dude, like a lot of this, a lot of your developers and development teams, technologists, they're all working from a remote, like work at home environment, right? Like I see James's Christmas tree in the background. How has Teams kind of helped in that kind of environment?
Yeah, as we've been kind of sent into a remote working scenario, Stack Overflow has helped with that, open an additional communication channel that didn't exist for us before. It's absolutely been a benefit for us.
Cool, that's awesome. You mentioned adoption, and we've had a chat before this, so I know that you guys kicked off like a stackathon when you first adopted, and then even after the stackathon ended, you continue to see participation grow. What kind of tips do you have for our viewers as far as rolling out a new software and driving adoption? What worked for you?
Yeah, we did have a really cool stackathon style contest. Some tips I think we would have is we had physical rewards. So we gave stickers to everybody who participated, but we also had shirts and various other prizes for the people who participated most. And that includes questions and answers. Um, I would also recommend that we took a two-pronged approach when it comes to our communication. So we did a top-down style communication to make sure that our development community felt like they had the support they needed from management. But we also did a bottom-up style communication just to raise awareness and excitement. And it was immediately successful for us. We saw a 125% increase in site traffic during the Stackathon.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, right. And then 60 days later, we had retained a 50% increase. So those numbers kind of speak for themselves in terms of success. And we're planning on doing another Stackathon next year.
So do you see this being like kind of an annual event or a semi-annual event? Any
We're going to
thoughts?
see. It seems for now, yes.
All right. How did people like earn like the stickers? What were the stickers? I mean, it's been a while since I've had a sticker collection, but I occasionally like stick some on the back of my laptop.
Just the stickers that you place on your laptop. So like stack themed stickers.
Cool, cool, awesome. Anybody gonna own up to what stickers they have on their laptop right now?
I spilled water on my
stickerless right
laptop
now.
a few weeks ago, so I just got a new one, so it's stickerless right now.
It's
Yeah, I'm stickerless too.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh no! Okay,
Yeah.
well, mine does have a Stack Overflow sticker, and then it's got some like ski stickers, and then maybe a few music stickers. So that's what I'm rocking on my laptop today.
The cool ones.
Well, we have to earn cred where we can, right? So, all right. Thanks for sharing that, dude. Let's go ahead and dive into our main topic today. Progressive came up with this really cool visualization of how their knowledge flows across the organization. What need were you trying to solve when you kicked off this project?
Yeah, I think it was a few things. So foremost, we're trying to increase developer productivity and accelerate their ability to deliver business value. So, when you have an outstanding technical question, that's a real barrier to flow. So if we can reduce the time it takes someone to get that question answered, our value streams work more efficiently and we deliver value more quickly. I think secondly, one of the things we're pretty proud of at Progressive is that when we hire someone, they tend to stick around for a while. So it's not uncommon to walk into a room or join a Teams call, since we're all working remotely, and be working with someone who has 15, 20, 25 years of not just IT experience, but actual experience in a given business domain. As you might imagine, that's a pretty large benefit for Progressive, but it can occasionally result in some pretty tall knowledge towers. So what we're trying to do is tap into that knowledge, centralize and aggregate it in a single location, and then make it available for all to consume. Then I would say the third and final thing we're really trying to solve is we've been hiring very aggressively the past few years, right? Progressive has been growing and our hiring has kept pace with that. So we're really trying to streamline our ability to onboard new hires and give them an avenue and sort of help them build their personal brand and network throughout our organization. And through that lens, Stack Overflow has been invaluable. And then when you layer the pandemic on top of all of this, where we've mostly been thrust into a remote working environment, our teams and leaders have done a very good job of keeping everyone connected. And we like to think that Stack is just another good tool in the toolbox to achieve those outcomes.
You mentioned a few things on there. You have these like industry veterans with all of their technical and like kind of organizational knowledge that's maybe been locked up in their heads, and now they're reaching out and they're sharing and they're mentoring perhaps these new onboarded employees. And then we've got this external like influence going on right now. The pandemic, the Great Resignation. How is Progressive like attracting that new talent? Those aggressive hires that you've been doing over the past 2 years. What's really bringing them as far as like technical opportunities at Progressive?
Yeah, I think it's a few things, right? I think in many ways, Progressive's brand speaks for itself. I think, and everyone's probably seen our commercials. I think they're brilliant. They're great commercials. So I think it really places us on a good footing in the forefront of everyone's mind. And then I think Progressive does a really good job at staying at the forefront of technology, right? We're leveraging cutting and sometimes bleeding edge technologies to achieve our outcomes. And I think that's really attractive as a technical resource.
All right. We've popped up this diagram, and David's going to go into it a little bit more detail later. But just for our viewers who may not be able to read some of these labels, can you just kind of give me like insight into what the labels are, like what they represent?
Sure. So if you look at the outside of the circle in that diagram, each section is a sub-organization within our larger IT organization. And the arcs that you see connecting them reflect the flow of information, right? So we draw an arc from the source of information or an answer to the destination of that information or a question. And that lets us sort of see how our organizations interact within Progressive and maybe where we have strengths or where we have some opportunities.
All right. Awesome. And then I'm guessing, of course, by like the size of these arcs, right, that the thicker the lines are, the more information is flowing. And the thinner they are, the less is flowing today.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's a very easy way to visualize an otherwise very complex flow of information.
Awesome. I'm gonna back up for a second. Now, to create this, you're using like all of the knowledge and data information that you have in Stack Overflow for Teams, but to pull it out, you used our API. What was that like, and do you have any lessons learned for our viewers?
Yeah, I think foremost, I would say the API is rock solid. I'm a big fan of your API. I think it's very easy to use and consume. It's very intuitive. If you're familiar with REST APIs, it's gonna feel very natural to you. I think maybe one learning I would share would be make extensive use of the filtering options that the API has built into it. Originally I didn't do that, and it works, but it results in a lot more API calls than maybe you'd otherwise need to make if you got a little clever with the way you could filter your data and choose which fields are returned, similar like to a GraphQL style request.
How long did this project take, like using the API and kind of planning out the requirements, deciding what you wanted, actually implementing it?
Once we had agreement on what we wanted to measure, that was something we tackled very early on with our leadership. I would say within maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks, Dude and I were able to build this from scratch to the visualization you see today. That includes deploying to a public cloud account and writing all of the backend code to scrape the API and aggregate data, and then to build this nice, pretty visualization.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I've been burned in the past, right? So that's why I started with requirements gathering and like executive buy-in, right? Because the real work doesn't start till after that, but that's such a huge chunk of time in any project. So thanks for sharing that. All right, let's dive into the data. David, do you want to take the next question?
Yeah, definitely. So as a data person, I love all visuals, and this one specifically is called a chord diagram, and you can really see how knowledge is flowing between all the organizations. I was actually very excited that we introduced this type of visualization this year in our developer survey as well. So instead of looking at how knowledge is flowing between organizations, we looked at what technologies developers are currently working with versus the ones they want to work with. So there's a lot going on, but did you ever have any stakeholders that you had to kind of explain this visualization to, just because it's not a visualization that you kind of see on an everyday basis?
Yeah, so I mean, what's cool, I guess what's neat about the chord diagram is that it can tell a set of simple stories, even though it's based on a complex set of data. So like as James was describing earlier, right, there's many entities and the connections between them. Those connections can have a magnitude and a direction. In our case, those entities are our domains. And the connections are the Q&A exchange, how many questions, and then the direction of that answer. The immediate story that it told us right after we had made it go live was that we were already breaking down the walls between our domains in terms of communication, which was a huge success for us. And that's obvious just by looking at it, because it's a web of connections going from the various quadrants.
Hey, had you used a
Yep.
chord diagram before this? I just feel like chord diagrams and maybe Sankey charts are kind of like the of visualizations right now.
I
They
had
just seem to
not
be
used
popping
the
up.
chord diagram. I have not. This was the first.
Yeah, they're
Where
really
Um,
great at like visualizing real complex relationships that you need to have lots of entities there. So as you can see, there's a lot of those sub organizations. So I really think like this was like the one visualization you can use in this case.
Right. And so, like, another story that it told us was that um, it told us some of our strengths. So, um, some of our domains focus on enabling other domains, like our cloud domain. And immediately there was a lot of answers coming from that domain, and that's easy to see. It has a wide segment, a lot of connections going to various other domains, and that's what we'd like to see. On top of that, though, it also shows us some opportunities, and those are areas that we're actively working with, trying to raise engagement with Stack Overflow. So it kind of tells a lot of stories in one visual.
It does. Would you be able to tell us more about the behind the scenes of how you got to get to this visualization? I know you mentioned you've used the API and you had some cloud processes, but could you walk us through what that looked like?
Yeah, so we pull in data with Lambda functions in our public cloud from Stack Overflow. But then we join to pull off a visualization like this. We join that data with data from Active Directory, and that's what gives us the ability to know where people are in the organization and where their questions and answers are going to in terms of domains.
Got it. Yes, because that data is not natively in Stack Overflow, correct?
Right.
Cool. Did you use any? What kind of visualization packages did you use for this?
So this is built in TypeScript using the Angular framework, and the visualization packages here are from D3.
Got it. So this is actually a web app that the stakeholders can interact with, not just
Yep.
a static
Anybody.
visualization.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Yeah. Well,
Who
thanks
has
for the
access
detailed
to
one. Go
who
ahead.
has access to look at it from the app? Sorry, you started to say everybody, I thought, but is that true? Anybody can look it up in the org?
Anyone
Yeah.
can look it up in our organization. Yes.
That's cool.
Yeah, that was kind of a core requirement of ours, right? Was we wanted to be able to asynchronously provide updates to anyone who is interested without them having to reach out to us and asking us to pull data. That's why we invested in these visualizations and these automated data flows, is so that every day this data refreshes and we can keep our finger on the pulse in real time.
In your first stackathon, I'm assuming that was probably like kind of individual rewards and goals. Do you envision maybe in your next stackathon that there will be departmental goals? So like, this department has a thinner line today, and the goal is to kind of make that thicker moving forward.
I think it's something we're actively considering. We're sort of looking for all avenues to increase adoption. I think we tread a bit carefully. We don't want to force this on anyone, right? It's sort of a tool in a toolbox, and we think that the value proposition is compelling enough that if we provide the tool and do some education, folks will leverage it. But we don't ever want to sort of tip to the other side of that spectrum where we sort of force something on someone who doesn't want it, because that's not really a recipe for long-term success.
That's such a good point, right? We want kind of quality knowledge bits in here, not necessarily just questions and answers or articles, just to fill a void. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I love that it's interactive for everyone in the organization, because it's great to see like, okay, I'm part of this department. Who am I interacting with the most? And I can see that boosting collaboration internally. Cool. So my next question I wanted to ask was, how did you identify and determine which metrics you wanted to look at? I know there's this visualization, but what kind of reporting and metrics did you use to measure the success of this cross-team collaboration?
Some of the metrics that we established at first, or like the requirements for those metrics, were based off assumptions we had in terms of where we thought our strengths were, or even our opportunities. The domains that support other domains, our assumption was that we would see high activity in those. And that proved out to be true based on the visualization. But we also worked with our senior leadership to understand what their interests and what their questions and concerns were. And then we tried to capture that in the visualization, among other visualizations we have on that webpage. And the metrics that we aim for they tell us where we are now, but they're also really helpful in terms of changes that we're going to make and measuring the success of those changes, or if we need to make additional changes because we didn't get the result we were looking for.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this moves as hybrid workplaces become more popular again. So with this visualization, I know you are saying that you wanted to look at how it changes. Are you looking at it at any other level, like tag level trends or activity over time, or are you keeping it pretty high level at this time?
So we're actually keeping it pretty high level. Because of the story we're looking to tell was from our organizational perspective, and it required our organizational data from Active Directory. It also makes it pretty easy to digest when it's at that level. But what really helped us kind of focus on that as our first step, or as our MVP, was that Stack Overflow already provides trending metrics. And so we were really able to leverage those and then focus our priorities on something that required us to join with our organizational data.
That's just the internal dashboard on Stack Overflow for teams, correct?
Yep.
Got it. Was there, when looking at this data, was there anything that surprised you that you weren't looking for initially?
Definitely. So what we see today is that 2 out of every 3 questions are answered by someone from an entirely different organization. And it was so shocking because when we first brought Stack Overflow in, right, you have this problem where you have to seed the application with as much good, high quality data as you can. So what we really did was positioned it as a way for SMEs to share their expertise, sort of Q&A style. So very early on, it was maybe 8 and 10 or 9 and 10 questions were asked and answered by the same person. So we knew that as we got more people to use the application, that number would sort of step back and that number would shrink and the number of cross-departmental interactions would increase. But what sort of caught us by surprise was how fast that change occurred. We expected that to occur over a year and a half, and it occurred in 3 or 4 months. So that was something that was really surprising. And I think the other thing was just how fast questions got answered, right? So we see that most questions are answered on Stack Overflow within an hour and a half. That's
Wow.
like far exceeds even my wildest, most ambitious expectations. That's virtually an immediate turnaround time. So that was something else that really jumped out at us.
Do you think the stickers and t-shirts helped?
I think swag never hurts. Let's say that, David.
Yeah, there you go.
I was going to say, you said they were answered by a different organization. You mean just different departments, right?
That's correct. Entirely different departments within IT, right? So it could be answered. Yeah. It's not just like I'm answering one of Dude's questions, right? That would be sort of an interdepartmental information exchange. This is someone in an entirely different group answering a question I have.
Well, I get the impression that you and Dude go way back, so it makes sense that you could depend on him to answer a question. But what's cool about getting your answers back in like an hour and a half from a completely different department or business unit is that I may not even know the person that has the answer. In the size organization, right? Like I don't know that Dude's going to have the answer because we don't work together. I don't know what he's an expert or SME in. So that really kind of gives everybody access to a lot of knowledge that they didn't have before. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the only thing sometimes more intimidating than not knowing how to do something is not knowing how to do something, but not knowing who to ask for help. And Stack Overflow really helps with the second half of that problem.
Yeah, exactly. You can kind of search if you have questions on a specific technology and see who's asking those questions to begin with. And also with the tags, if you have a specific tag that you have a question around, you can just throw it out and hopefully get to the right person, which it will.
Do you guys ever like suffer from like kind of like star all, right? Like somebody's a SME and something and you almost feel like you don't want to bother them, but you know the right person is going to answer your question. I feel like the platform really gives everybody that medium to share that information without feeling afraid that you're gonna look dumb.
Absolutely. And then if you look at it from the SME's perspective, they answer a question once and then that information persists and is available to everyone going forward. So not only does the person asking a question see a productivity boost, but the SME who has that expertise and knowledge gets a corresponding productivity boost on the other end.
Oh, so cool.
Yeah, and I'll also mention that the SME's not interrupted. They're not getting pinged on Slack. They're not getting notified on email. They're going to Stack Overflow on their own accord to answer that question instead of that interrupting their workflow, which could be very important.
Absolutely.
David, you bring up a good point. Actually, and I don't know this. Does Progressive use the Slack or the Microsoft Teams integrations?
We do use the Microsoft Teams integration. It's pretty convenient, I'll say. Being able to bring Stack Overflow data right to Teams where folks are working day in and day out collaborating with their teams is a pretty big benefit. And in fact, what we see is some of our enablement domains have a Teams channel where they send any question or answer any exchange related to their area of expertise right to a Teams channel. And that's a really good way for them to stay engaged and sort of keep their finger on their respective communities.
That's awesome. All right. You can see how that definitely helps, not even having to switch windows just to ask or answer a question. Cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and earlier you mentioned that it was pretty organic how fast people onboarded to Stack Overflow, but has there been any commonalities that you found when onboarding, say, new users or new teams? Because there's one thing that I've heard is the kind of like the fear of asking that first question. How do you come about that, or is there anything that you do to incentivize people to start asking questions?
Yeah, I think lucky for us, Progressive is our culture really affords folks the confidence to be themselves, to bring their whole selves to work, and by extension, that sort of affords them the psychological safetyness to ask questions, right? So there's not really a fear of asking a new question. That's not really what we're trying to overcome in our organization. Mm-hmm. I think what we find instead is it's just building a new habit, right? Like changing habits is hard. We're about to be in New Year's and everyone's going to make a New Year's resolution, and it's well documented that most of them fail, right? It's very difficult to change the way you do things, and leveraging a new tool is no different. So that's really what we're trying to overcome is building that muscle memory.
Oh no, James, I completely deliver on all my New Year's resolutions. I don't know what you're talking about.
You're a better person than I am.
All right.
With that being said, do you guys have dedicated moderators, or do you do any type of moderation, or do you kind of just leave it up to the community as a whole?
We do moderate. We do have a small team of pre-assigned moderators who go in and make sure that the community's healthy and sort of is shaped the way we want it to. And then we make extensive use of Stack Overflow's features that allow people to organically obtain moderator privileges just by using the application, right? That's really the strategy we've taken was when people reach out and say, hey, James, or hey, dude, I want to be a moderator in Stack Overflow. This is something of interest to me. Our response is, hey, great. Use the application and you'll get those permissions and those capabilities on your own. It's a really compelling system that we make extensive use out of.
I love that. I love being able to crowdsource and democratizing privileges, and kind of getting everybody's buy-in and how to make the system work for you. Mm-hmm. David, I interrupted you. Go for it.
Oh, no, it's fine. I was just saying that's exactly what we see on our public platform. Is the community becomes self-sufficient and moderates their own communities.
I want to back up a second. James, you had a really kind of key term that I heard in one of your answers, and that's psychological safety, and this idea that Progressive already has a pretty healthy work culture, an environment that rewards people for being their full selves and being able to ask those questions without fear. Is there anything that Progressive has changed culturally or process wise as a result of seeing the data and this visualization that you guys have put together?
We wouldn't say we've changed culturally with the use of the tool or the metrics that we're seeing. It's more of an enhancement over our existing culture. So at Progressive, you're strongly encouraged to share what you know. And what Stack Overflow and these metrics are helping us do is take that existing culture, enhance it, and spread it across all our domains, which has obviously been a success for us so far, and we look forward to seeing it get better.
Were there any metrics that you started off at the beginning of this project and maybe you've gone back and you said, okay, those weren't quite the right metrics that we want to track, and you've changed which ones that you want to look at now?
We haven't changed any metrics, as in capturing something that we don't want now. We are looking to expand our metrics in terms of adding some trending to that, in terms of organizational trending. There's also some tech stacks that have seen a lot of activity, and so maybe those are opening up opportunities for us to help with onboarding or training.
Those tech stacks that are seeing a lot of activity, have you rolled up into collections or maybe written some long form articles because they are so popular?
Certainly. We sort of leverage those. Our guidance has been that if it's a sufficiently complex space where there's a lot of nuance to the answer or the collection of answers, that's when we sort of push people that direction instead of the standard Q&A section of the site. And we really use that for the longer, more complex topics. If something's very finite and very small, we sort of keep folks in that Q&A space.
Were any of the tech stacks a surprise?
I don't know that they were. I would say they were a surprise. I think the tech stacks that saw the most activity are the ones that are the comparatively newest to Progressive, right? So if there's a technology we've leveraged for 25, 30 years, we see fewer questions asked on that technology than one that maybe we've only leveraged for 5. I think it's more of how long we've been using it is the best indicator for how much activity we're seeing on the site at the moment.
And when you guys introduced at the beginning of this fireside chat, I heard the words open source. Is that kind of a new area for Progressive?
It is.
Yeah.
We established. Yeah, go ahead, dude. Please take it.
No, go ahead, James. You got it, man.
Yeah, so we established our open source office in 2020. Progressive has been making extensive use of open source for some time, but we really established the office to continue to mature the way we consume open source software, as well as to make sure Progressive is giving back and being a good citizen in the open source community.
What does that look like as far as being a good citizen in the open source community? How do you define that?
I think that's taking our inclusive culture, bringing that into the issues that we open, the pull requests that we put out there, but also actively giving back. So for years, we've used open source, and one of our key initiatives is to make sure that we're actively participating and giving back to the things that we're using, making them better and making it better for the whole community.
Cool. Awesome. I love that. David, I'm going to put you on the hot seat. Do you have any more in-depth data questions that you want to cover right now?
No, not too much. One thing did stand out to me, James. You mentioned that you guys are using more cutting edge and bleeding edge tech. Do you think that Stack Overflow for Teams is empowering you you more to leverage that because you're seeing a lot of the activity, the questions around those tech stacks?
I would say certainly, right? So the way new technologies often adopted, within progressive or anywhere in society is a small number of people uh, leverage it and become subject matter experts in it, and then it sort of grows organically from there. That's sort of how technology evolves. And
Exactly.
Stack Overflow sort of helps accelerate that evolution and that dissemination of knowledge from subject matter experts to folks who maybe understand the value proposition but don't yet have the skills to make use of it. Right? It's certainly been a big help in that space.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what we see on the public platform as well. As new technologies come out, there's an influx of questions, and then there's like this maturity curve as questions are answered and people are learning the technology.
All right. I've learned so much in like the past like 38 minutes. So thank you guys for that. I'm going to open it up to our Q&A now. So again, for our viewers, if you have questions, drop in our Q&A. Our moderator is going to help us out with that. And I'm going to go ahead and start taking a few of those. The first question comes from Guillermo, and it's, what is the size of the community that's interacting with Stack Overflow for Teams?
Yeah, so our total target size is around, 3,500 users. We've only got about 50%, a little bit less market penetration at the moment in our first year of this initiative. So we're going to look to continue to grow that as we mature and move on.
All right. The next question I have from Alex is, it's really about the functionality for question askers to be able to ping SMEs or SME teams. David kind of hinted on this earlier. It's about being able to tag the experts. You guys use that, right? That's what I think I heard earlier in the conversation.
Yeah, correct. When you ask questions, we absolutely allow for the tagging and directing of questions to subject matter experts.
And being able to tag people or teams is kind of a feature that's limited to Stack Overflow for Teams compared to our public site. So I really do think it's kind of a cool feature to be able to reach people a little bit faster and get their attention. All right, so Matthew asks, what about instances where folks have offered good answers in the past, but they leave the organization? Does this affect the trust in the answers, and do you have any recommendations?
So the first thing I'll throw out, and this is perhaps a bit unique to Progressive, is luckily we don't have a lot of people leaving our organization, right? So that is absolutely a problem, but it's one we're lucky enough to not have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. On the rare instances where that does happen, we haven't found it's degraded trust in the answers. And in fact, our power users do a very good job of going in and sort of identifying stale questions and making sure that they're up to date and that the community is healthy and progressing. So, to answer your question a bit more directly, my recommendation would be identify who is passionate about seeing your Stack Overflow initiative succeed, and then really challenge them to find ways to keep that community healthy. And then if you could set up some automated alerting or metrics that, maybe this individual left the company, let's go take a look at all the data and information they provided. Let's make sure it's still healthy is something else you might consider.
All right. Awesome. If we go back to the chord diagram real quick, and I did cover this off earlier in our fireside chat, the labels are really hard for our viewers to read it. Can you just, again, recap like exactly, whether they're department names or office locations? What are we looking at here again?
So these are department names. So or different domains. So for us, they would include domains that enable others, like our cloud or security domains. But they also include ones that provide business functionality, like our quoting or billing domains. And as you can see, we have many. So I won't rattle through all of them, but that's what every one of those quadrants is supposed to represent.
Cool. And then when we go back to kind of like the initial adoption of Stack Overflow for Teams, did you have any issue with initial knowledge duplication, and not duplication necessarily within Stack Overflow for Teams, but Stack Overflow for Teams and like another wiki or Confluence or some kind of documentation system that you may use in your ecosystem.
We did. So having knowledge sort of in many different areas of Progressive was a challenge we faced. We sort of got around that by encouraging people to either duplicate that data in Stack Overflow and say, hey, try to use Stack Overflow as your source of truth going forward, or instances where that other pre-existing documentation was large or complex or very mature. We recommended just linking out to it directly. So someone asks a question, how do I, perform task XYZ? The answer can be, here's the direct answer to your question. For more context, please see these more verbose documents elsewhere. And then over time, we can say, should we be migrating these to articles or collections? It sort of gives us options as to how we best handle that going forward.
Yeah, and I'll ask a personal question here. Do you see a case where after a lot of the information has been migrated, that perhaps your organization is seeing like a cost savings by getting out of another software suite?
I think most of our documentation suites to date have been open source, so they bear no direct cost in fairness, but there is absolutely a productivity boost and something to be gained from not having to document something in two places, right? So that's a bit fuzzier, a bit harder to measure, but I can tell you organically that it's absolutely there.
Perfect. And that productivity is not just, on the writers, the documentation writers, like perspective, but also the person seeking information, like being able to know where to go or which terms to search for, right? So sometimes if you don't have the project scope or what the repository name is for a code project, it may be hard to find the answers that you're looking for. But I think Teams kind of provides that hub and that whole ecosystem. Have you found that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So we're very hesitant to increasing the cognitive load of our developers as, the world moves quickly. There's a lot we're trying to get done. Folks are trying to adopt new technologies, ensuring they're staying on the cutting edge of the way to do things. That bears a price on your cognitive load. And Rebecca, what you sort of alluded to is another piece of that puzzle.
Awesome. Let's see. I think we talked about stickers. We talked about T-shirts as part of Stackathon. But does Progressive leverage any rewarding structure for those that ask questions or provide answers throughout the year? So outside of that Stackathon event.
Currently, we haven't done an ongoing like a year wrap up style reward system. That sounds like a great idea, though. So noted.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there is the intrinsic rewarding system and gamification of Stack Overflow itself. So just like our public platform, Teams has reputation points. You earn those additional privileges, like being a content health moderator or just moderation in general. So there are rewards along the way. There's also just being seen as an expert in something, right? So if I answer questions and you come to me and you're like, oh, Rebecca knows a lot about this, that makes me feel warm and fuzzy. I mean, I get something out of that, right? So hopefully that's at least equal to a sticker. What would be your advice for community kickstart and seeding period? So seeding that initial knowledge.
Yeah, maybe a couple pieces. I think the first piece of advice is leverage your customer success manager, right? So our customer success manager, Mitz, is phenomenal, and he's someone we partnered with from the very beginning to say, hey, what have you seen that has worked? What have you seen that hasn't? And really pick their brain as to good patterns. I think the second thing I would say is we saw a lot of success as positioning it as a way to alleviate the burden on our subject matter experts. We really said, hey, you're probably getting the same question over and over and over. Share your knowledge Q&A style. And that really served as the backbone on which we've built everything else, right? Because now as we are encouraging folks throughout Progressive to leverage Stack Overflow, they go there and they see a few hundred questions with rich, high quality data. They're more likely to return than if they went there and saw crickets or heard crickets, I guess. So that would be my other piece of advice.
For sure, for sure. That productivity on the SME side. The flip side of that, though, is what about new hires? How have they responded coming in and having access to this knowledge base?
Very positively, I'd say. So Dude and I meet with all of our new hire classes. So we go in and we explain to them, what the office is, what we do. We explain our open source and inner source strategies, and then we show them Stack Overflow. And that's where we spend the majority of our time. And the sort of informal feedback we've gotten is that on occasion, new hires feel bad asking their mentor questions over and over. That's just a human element. Like, I think our mentors are phenomenal. They do a good job of making themselves available, but there's just the people side of, I've asked Dude 15 questions in the last day. I kind of feel bad. This gives them a vehicle to self-serve answers to their questions, and I think that's been very well received.
Awesome. I'm gonna put you in a hot seat for a second, and you may not have like the stat, but have you seen any like tangible change in like how quickly new hires onboard after implementing Teams?
Yeah, that's not something we've done a good job measuring to date. I think it's very challenging to measure that. So we've relied on a bit more of the more qualitative measurements of how we're doing. If you have any ideas for how we might quantitatively measure that, please reach out, because we'd love to hear it and see how we can do that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I've read a couple of news articles and stuff like that about, like the different ramp up times for different organizations. There's one of the FANG companies that doesn't expect like new developers to like contribute for like really like 6 months. Like, that's how long it's taking them to like ramp up on like the internal tools and everything like that. And then on the counter side, I've read about organizations that try to get their developers to like at least push a change on their very first day. So I think there are some metrics out there that we could start tracking, but maybe they're just not in place yet. You did mention both open source and inner source. So I do want to get a definition of inner source for people that may not be as familiar with that term as open source. James, can you take that question?
Yeah, sure. So if you're familiar with open source and all of the concepts associated with it, where it's the open collaborative development of software in the IT industry, it's all of those same things, but you limit it to your organization. So you want to adopt those same methodologies, those same ways of software development, but it's on software, in our case, that never leaves Progressive's boundaries.
All right. And then one of our questions we have, of course, and this is going to depend on where like this data visualization falls as far as the open source and giving back to the open source community, and that inner source like bounded projects. Is this visualization work available to the public for them to implement for their own Stack Overflow for teams?
So the visualization that we've put together is currently on our inner source, and we view our inner source at times as like a pathway to open source. So if there is interest, which it sounds like there might be, and this is something we've talked about before, like, yeah, we can help make this open source. But also I want to point out that the D3 packages that do a lot of the heavy lifting here are open source too. So I want to give credit to everyone who's worked on those.
And David, you mentioned before too that Stack Overflow itself is working on core diagrams. You kind of approached it from a different perspective. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so we were answering a slightly different question. We were looking at our survey data to see what like programming languages developers are currently working with, and then the ones they want to work with. So say you have a JavaScript developer who wants to start developing in Go in the next year. So that's how we were using it. And we're currently exploring ways of incorporating core diagrams and how knowledge is flowing inside of Teams. So stay tuned for that. But as of right now, we don't have it available, but it's definitely of interest.
And I should point out that because this is pulling from sources that aren't in Stack Overflow, like departments, like where people report into, which is, traditionally and for good legal and privacy reasons, there, HR data, right? Like I could not go run the same diagram for Progressive. That has to be that has to originate within the organization.
Exactly. Yeah. There's that layer of data that we do not see. So that would have to be joined on the back end, which would be great if Progressive and you all could open source this and kind of give the how-to guide of how to create this on their side.
In the analytics, do you measure users who have viewed Q&A but maybe haven't necessarily answered a question? Is that one of your metrics? Internally within Stack Overflow, we call that knowledge reuse, but I don't know if you're tracking that on your dashboard.
Yeah, we try to track that by our views per question metric, and then what we seek to do is derive a multiplier for that metric. So Dude mentioned at the beginning of this, we see an average of 60 views per question. So what we then do is we sort of interview folks in the developer community and say, how often do you view a question that it actually answers the question you had? Because sometimes if you have a question and you're searching for answers, maybe you open 5 tabs and then you find the one that actually solves your problem. So we try to derive a multiplier from there, and from there we can infer that knowledge reuse. But that's where we're at today. It's a bit fuzzy, but we think it still paints a fair picture.
Okay, cool. I'll go back
also,
to go ahead, David. Sorry.
I was just going to add into what you said, Rebecca. That's a metric that we have on the that you can calculate on the Stack Overflow for Teams dashboard. So you are getting those views and you're all getting those questions. So that is something that you will be able to derive from the internal dashboard as well.
We have a question about privacy and maybe whether or not you're concerned about issues with leaking confidential information. As I mentioned, this is some of the data here is pulling from internal like HR systems to kind of map that departmental linkage. What kind of security requirements did you put in as far as running this? And again, I'll go back to this has to run within the organization. Stack Overflow can't run this. We don't have any links to your HR systems.
Yeah, that's correct. We run this dashboard and this visualization is ultimately rendered within the Progressive network. So we follow all of our existing security best practices and requirements to do that, in an appropriate manner. Given the sensitivity of it, I'm not going to go into too much detail beyond that. But let's say we're following all of Progressive's enterprise security standards with this data and making sure we're accessing it and storing it appropriately.
Cool. Awesome. Let's see. What advice would you give to someone or to a company who's interested in bringing on Stack Overflow for Teams?
I think some of the advice that we would give is kind of based on some of the answers that we've been going over. Having a contest, for example, increased participation. Being ready to do kind of like a roadshow and like talk to all the different areas and communities that you have. That's important, and reminding them that it's the muscle memory. So instead of like pinging somebody through Teams or sending an email to a SME, take that question and put it on Stack. And it's a lot of that community involvement. That's a huge recommendation, I think, from us.
This next question, and I think I know the answer, is that there wasn't a version of this graphic before Stack Overflow for Teams, right? You had no way to measure how knowledge was flowing between departments and teams.
That's correct. If one existed within Progressive, I've certainly never seen it.
Okay. So you're setting that baseline now. You're increasing adoption. You're seeing Different departments adopt it. You're going to hold another stackathon over the next year. So we would expect to see changes to this diagram as the adoption grows and as your instance matures.
That's correct. And that's what's sort of nice about all the automation we built is this diagram gets redrawn nightly. So we can visually see how this evolves over time very easily.
Cool. And then my next question is, do you have any process around grooming tags? So this goes back to keeping like the knowledge, base healthy and democratizing, like, who has moderator rights and going in and editing and updating and accepting answers, but specifically the tags.
Yeah, I think initially we took a very laissez-faire approach, right? We wanted people to tag things, and for a period of time, we sort of accepted that there might be some duplicates. Then really what we did was we challenged the community to say, hey, if you see a duplicate, recommend that we do something about it, right? So Stack Overflow provides that mechanism where you could say, hey, this tag looks like a duplicate, right? What do we want to, what should we do about that? So we make big use of that, and we sort of leverage the community to help be our eyes and ears, in addition to the moderators we already have assigned who are performing those duties for us. But the advice would be just early on, it's not the end of the world if you have a couple duplicates. What's important is to get people to use the site, and then over time you could increase your data quality by deduplicating your tags.
I agree wholeheartedly with that, right? Like, don't slap people's hands for participating, right? Get them used to participating, and then do some cleanup. We have time for one more question, but before we break, do you feel that you would have been as successful if you had rolled out all 3,500 users at once, versus how you've been rolling it out with the initial 1,500?
So the rollout, so like the number of participants, it's actually a moment ago I was mentioning, it's the roadshow, the introducing people to the idea of using the platform, and building up that muscle memory. That's the overall numbers, those are increasing organically as we do that. So introducing it to everybody probably wouldn't have resulted in much of a difference, because it's the working with the communities and getting them to use it that is actually getting increased participation.
Cool. All right, that's all the time we have for questions. Team, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. Before we go, if our viewers have questions after the webinar, I think you have an email address that they can write you directly. That was, I believe, open_source_office@progressive.com. And of course, if you want to learn about Stack Overflow for Teams, we've got information on our website for that too. Again, everybody, thanks. Any parting words before we say goodbye today?
It's great chatting with you. Thanks. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
You're welcome. I will have you back anytime at all. So thank you.
Definitely.
Have a great day.
Take care, everyone.